Good morning. If you're watching this video, this is the Regional Transit Vision Plan for the Charlottesville area. This is the first stakeholder workshop. The meeting will start at 9 a.m. If you're watching this video, this is the Regional Transit Vision. Hello, if you're joining us on YouTube, this is the Regional Transit Vision Plan for the Charlottesville area. We will be starting our workshop at 9 o'clock. Thanks for waiting for us, and thanks for joining us and being here this morning. It'll be 9 o'clock, so about 4 minutes. All right, we're at 9 o'clock. Matthew, do you want to in the waiting room? Great.
Good morning. Looks like we're loading up here.
We are. Hi, Diantha. How are you?
Hey, good morning.
Diantha, does that mean you're loaded?
Well, I'm trying, it's on a rainy Thursday. See if I can get it to where I don't have so much glare. It's probably impossible, but anyway. Hey, Lloyd. Good morning.
How are you?
I'm fine.
Well, good morning, everyone. We'd like to welcome you to the first stakeholder meeting for the Regional Transit Vision Plan. If you don't mind, I was going to make a few very quick statements here, just to go ahead and get us started in terms of
Okay.
the Zoom call.
I can't, but it's For Tuesday,
Excuse
it's an
me.
hour and a half.
Okay,
Excuse me, someone needs to turn their mute on. We're hearing somebody talk.
I got it. Thanks, Lynn.
Great.
So, yeah, so we are, this is our first stakeholder meeting. And Diane, I'm going to hand it off to you in just a moment. Just want to give a few
Sure.
tips, given that we are on a Zoom format. But please mute your lines when you are not using them, given that we are here virtually using this platform. We just want to make sure that if we can all mute our lines, whether it seems like everyone's on the computers, which is great, but that'll just help them minimize distractions and allow everyone an opportunity to speak. Also, if you could please leave your webcams on, if you don't mind, just so that we can see each other. That's something, while we can't be in person, it's nice to try to mimic that as much as possible so we can see each other. And if you're trying to get someone's attention or anything else, we can see you. You can also, on the Zoom selection there, go on participants. And if you could make sure that you have your name, your full name. It looks like everybody's good on here, but if it comes up like City of Charlottesville or Louisa County, we want to go ahead and put your name in there so that we can identify you. If you are calling in through audio using your phone, please let us know so that we can make sure that when we put you in breakout rooms that we're including your phone in that as well. Please refer to the chat. There's again a chat button right there on Zoom. If you have any questions, please put that in there. We will save the chat. The chat will be part of the meeting record. So please refer to that. If you have any IT troubles or anything else, we also have Matthew on the line, and Matthew's going to provide his contact information in the chat if you have any issues and need to contact him to get into the meeting. Also, I'm going to refer you to the reactions button there on your Zoom. You can see the bottom kind of right-hand side. When we do get to several points in the meeting where we have open discussion, you can please use that to raise your hand or if you have any questions. Now, again, please feel free to use the chat. We'll refer to that throughout the entire meeting. I also want to send a reminder that we are live streaming. So we are currently on YouTube. It is streaming through YouTube right now. We have that out on the project website. So just as a reminder that we'll be live streaming through this whole meeting. And also we are recording this. So we will make sure to have the recording available on the TJPDC off of their website for future viewing. So with that said, I'm going to actually hit record. And Diantha, I will hand it over to you. Oh, Diantha, you're muted. Sorry. It's officially a Zoom meeting. We've had our first meeting. Looks like you're still.
There we go. Had to catch my button. Sorry.
Oh, no worries.
So good morning. We are now going to begin the Regional Transit Partnerships meeting with a focus on the Regional Transit Vision Plan. As the chair of the Regional Transit Partnership, I'd just like to acknowledge the hard work that our advisory board has accomplished over the last 4 years. The RTP has created an operational framework, goals and objectives, and developed a scope and timeline for accomplishing RTP's purpose, conducted a retreat to develop a mission statement for the RTP, brokered a funding agreement between CAT and Albemarle County, secured 2 DRP grants to expand transit service in the Thomas Jefferson region, which is why we're here today. And as part of those transit studies, we are hosting this stakeholder meeting to help create what we hope to be a regional transit vision. Now I have to do the legal stuff. So let me read our electronic meeting, please. This meeting of the Regional Transit Partnership is being held pursuant to Code of Virginia 2.2-3708.2, which allows a public body to hold electronic meetings when the locality in which it is located has declared a local state of emergency, and the catastrophic nature of the emergency makes it impractical or unsafe to assemble a quorum in a single location. And the purpose of the meeting is to provide for the discharge of its lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities. This meeting is being held via electronic video and audio means through Zoom online meetings and is accessible to the public with closed captioning. Notice has been provided to the public through the notice at the TJPDC offices and to the media website posting and the agenda. The meeting minutes will reflect the nature of the emergency. The meeting was held by electronic communication means and the type of electronic communication means by which the meeting was held. A recording of the meeting will be posted at tjpdc.org within 10 days of the meeting. And with this, I want to just thank everybody for joining us this morning. And it really, the crowd that I see joining us is just wonderful, and it really represents an interest and a real resolve by our community to expand our public transit and transportation system in this county and community. So thank you so much. And with that, let me turn it over to Christine Jacobs, who I have to find somewhere on that screen somewhere. Christine, I know you're there. And Christine is the director of the Thomas Jefferson Regional Planning District. And Christine, it's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Diantha, both for the introduction, but also for the work that you've done on the Transit Partnership and for the work as the chair of that partnership. We want to make sure to thank you for your contribution. The Regional Transit Vision Plan, while it is facilitated by the TJPDC, we are doing it in collaboration with all of these community partners to make sure that it goes in the direction that the community wants the vision to be, and also that it's funded through the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation with local matches both from the city of Charlottesville and Albemarle County. Invited to participate today is the membership of the Regional Transit Partnership, both voting and non-voting members, transit operator staff, TJPDC staff, and all of you all as vested transit stakeholders from our 6 member jurisdictions, community partners, agencies, and folks with lived experience. I'd like to thank all of you all for taking your time out of your schedules to attend today's stakeholder workshop, and would like to thank you in advance for your willingness to share your perspectives and your visions for transit in our region. I'd also like to thank any of the public that's following along on our live stream for their interest and for their investment of time, and want to share with you all that there will be opportunities for the public to engage in these conversations that are happening today. There has been a lot of momentum and growth. I know I am new in this role, but I have been at the TJPDC for several years. And I just want to make sure that we all recognize, it's very easy to point out the work that needs to be done, but I want to recognize the momentum and the growth that has occurred around coordination and cooperation and the beginnings of authentic collaboration on what are complex and challenging issues, and they're not unique to the Charlottesville region when it comes to transit. So things such as greenifying fleets, addressing equity concerns, exploring sustainable fare-free models, mitigating the effects of a nationwide driver shortage, exploring innovative service models, changing and improving routes and service. A lot of work is happening and a lot of change is occurring. And I urge us to keep that momentum up, but to also have patience with the process as it's done very intentionally and using data and engaging all of our stakeholders to make sure that all voices are heard through this visioning process. Finally, I want to thank our service providers for your tireless work navigating a really difficult time, a global pandemic, balancing the needs of the community. Ridership, safety of passengers has been critical. It has been a trying year or two, and we want to thank you for your work. Finally, we have a very talented team of consultants with us today. We're really thrilled with our team from AECOM, Jarrett Walker and Associates, and EPR to facilitate this process with us. Tim Brule is our project manager from AECOM. You'll see Scudder Wag today as well from Jarrett Walker and Associates, and Will Cockrell from EPR. I'd also like to introduce our internal team, myself, but also Sandy Shackelford as our Director of Planning and Transportation, and Senior Regional Planner Lucinda Shannon, who is the lead on our Regional Transit Partnership. So again, thank you all for joining us, for offering your expertise, your vision, your lived experience to make this what it really needs to be to move us in the right direction. And from here, Tim Brule from AECOM will now take us into the meeting agenda and introduce their study team.
Great, thank you, Christine. As you said, I'm the project manager from AECOM, and we have a talented group of consultants on our team as well. As you can see, we have the agenda up on the screen. First, we'll go through some brief introductions, background, and the purpose of the project overview and engagement process to kind of know what to expect as we get into the process. Then we'll talk about have a discussion on transit values and trade-offs led by Scudder Wag. Then we'll have a visioning exercise followed by a debrief and Q&A. After that, we'll kind of wrap up and talk about the next steps. There'll be a lot of information presented to you today, but we will have opportunities to engage. We'll have 4 live polling questions as we discuss those key themes and values. There will also be 2 opportunities for those more detailed breakout room discussions. As Will just mentioned as he opened the meeting, the chat is open, and we encourage you to use that during our presentation to ask questions, share comments, anything, any thoughts that you have as we discuss discuss our information. Our staff is monitoring the chat, and feel free to raise your hand if you would like to speak at any time. Like I said, we'll have those opportunities throughout the presentation to answer and engage with you all. Next slide. So this is our first sort of polling question, and I guess I will ask you to introduce you all. Introduce yourselves over the chat. Include your name, affiliation, and include what you're most excited about with this project. Next slide. And Matthew, can you launch the poll? Again, this is our first polling question of today. So please go ahead and answer as appropriate. So who are you representing today? And I do realize that multiple selections may be appropriate for some people. So you are able to select multiple selections if appropriate. Thank you. And Will, would you like to take over while folks are introducing themselves?
Yeah, sure thing. So as mentioned, my name is Will Cockrell. I'm with EPRPC, just down the street, actually, from the TJPDC offices. We are in, obviously, downtown Charlottesville. I was actually with the PDC for about 10 years. And when I was there in 2016, and I remember working with Diantha and others there on staff on developing the regional transit coordination study. And what we had done during that process was a year-long process, interviewing the different local officials and trying to identify how can we better coordinate the 3 separate transit services that we have here in our region. And the main recommendation coming out of that effort was to establish the regional transit partnership. And I think Diantha and Christine both really gave a great overview of successes so far from the regional partnership. And they have been going down their list of to-do items as they have been progressing through their strategic plan. And this action here, the transit vision plan, was one of the real central themes coming out of that 2016 study. Of what we found is talking to different stakeholders and local officials and providers we determined that there was a need for a centralized vision of what is transit supposed to be, or what should it be, what ought it be for this region. And that vision can help to coordinate the three separate transit providers, as well as the localities, the university, and others in the region towards that vision. So the purpose of the call today, again, we keep seeing people come into the meeting, and this is really great attendance. We really appreciate the time that you're giving us this morning. What we're intending to provide to you today is just, first of all, an introduction to the transit vision planning process. So we have scheduled, this is again our first stakeholder meeting. I'd like to update you on the work that we have done so far, as we have been busy collecting information, and Scudder will review his great presentation to help you try to view transit through a new lens as we're going through decision-making processes as a region, and also receive high-level input as we move forward through this process. We have different elements of the transit vision planning schedule. We've been on that first element there of assess. We've been collecting data on existing transit systems. We've done a land use assessment for the region. We've done transit propensity analysis that Jarrett Walker Associates has been assembling. We have also, AECOM has gone through and identified any transit or other related plans in the region, and done a very thorough, detailed overview of just other efforts that have been occurring in the region that are related to transit. So we're entering more this element of identify what are our basic fundamental goals, our values and priorities, as we're starting to get into the first steps of identifying what that transit vision may be for our region. We have many different stakeholder meetings. This is just the first, and we also have public forums scheduled in this process. So we'll be engaging with you as stakeholders as well as the public as we're going through this process. The vision plan itself, what will help to bring it some more clarity and detail, are actually draft network recommendations, corridor level improvements as well. So the vision itself will be supported by, on that last bit there, recommendations that will show how to actually implement that vision that we have developed through this process that you see here. So we're at that first red dot there on the far left. As I mentioned, we've been busy collecting data, reviewing existing plans. We also have a project website. You'll see a link to that website on future slides. We will also we'll be entering the link to the project website on the chat. So someone on the team will be doing that so that you can easily access it. We have surveys up on the project website. We encourage you, please go on there, and we encourage you to fill out those surveys, and we are looking forward to hearing back from you through that avenue as well. Coming up in the next phase, we have our first public forum into this winter, late fall period, as well as 2 more stakeholder workshops as we're getting into actually the envision part of this. And then finally, when we get into next year, actually affirming what we've heard in terms of vision and recommendations. So what we have, actually our first breakout here. So what we're going to do actually is send you all into breakout rooms with the question of, what do you hope to get out of this transit visioning process? And before we do that, I'm going to ask, first of all, Krista, check the chat if there's any comments that we have, and we're also going to provide an opportunity now for questions. So please make sure to use that react button if you want to raise your hand. And we would prefer to talk to you, but if you would also like to use the chat, we can do that as well.
Will, at this point, no one's asked any specific questions, but everybody has sort of talked about what they're hoping to get out of the vision process. And people are talking about multimodal connections as being very important. The connection between housing, affordable housing, and transit. Let's see, and equity, very important, identified as equity and the equitable access to mobility. So at this point, again, folks have identified some of the things they're hoping to get out of the vision process, but no specific questions at this point.
Great. Okay. Any comments before we go to breakouts? Remember, you can use the react button. Any questions?
Well, I'll just note in the survey responses that were posted, it looks like we have nearly half of the folks in the room representing in some way a community group, which is great to see, representation from so many community organizations in this workshop.
Yeah.
Very important.
Yeah, great.
And it does look like we just got a comment in about advertising the survey on buses or at stops via QR code. Or at perhaps the downtown transit center as well. So that is a very good idea. And I think that's something we can work with the local partners to make that happen.
Great. Yeah, that's a great idea. All
Will
right.
regular riders on the bus that don't have an organizational affiliation be considered to be in the stakeholder group?
Will?
Yeah, we obviously want to consider them throughout the process. So in terms of stakeholders, that's something we'll be working with the PDCs to try to find who can we identify to represent those groups. And also going back to, as Scudder said, the survey, and we have public forums. We have 2 public forums through this process. So we do want to try to encourage and engage those folks as well throughout this process. Yeah. And
I would add that a lot of the questions that we were asking you all today are actually in the survey to the public. So they will be asked a lot of the same questions we're asking you all today. Just obviously, we've invited you all to spend a bit more time getting some background in this intense time today.
Lucinda, it looks like you have
can I jump in here? So we did ask the transit providers to share names and contact information of some of their riders, and we invited them to this meeting. I also called them earlier this week to see if they could attend. I think maybe the timing of the meeting wasn't good for them, so I'm not sure if any were able or are in here today, but a lot of them were not able to attend. But we did ask.
Okay. All right. Any final questions before we got Matthew? Do you have the breakout group set up? Matthew, I might ask if you could stay in the main room, just so if anyone joins in, you can get them into a group, and it's just so we have someone here in the main room. And so we are again streaming through YouTube. So if someone is watching on YouTube, we're going to take about a 10-minute break here from your viewing. We will record everything we hear in these breakout sessions. So we will have those as our official meeting notes and available after the meeting as well. So Matthew, I think we're ready to go. Should I go to that Tim is for?
You'll be in
Scudder is
one.
two. I'll be in one. Great. Okay.
My apologies, you all. I'm just going to assign you to rooms really quickly.
We seem to be the only group that came back. We could just continue our conversation.
Well, everyone else will be forced back in here at some point, right, Matt?
Right now.
Right. Okay.
Back.
We are.
Thanks, Becca. You the timer cut you off there, but thank you. It was great comments.
Hey, Peter, Trevor, and Peter and my group, Peter was cut off as well. So,
nope, it was perfect. Got it all in just in
okay. So if you wanted to put anything else, make any other points, please put it in the chat.
Yeah, great.
Thank you. And that goes to everyone that might have been cut off there.
Well, we appreciate the the discussion. We do have a few minutes. We'd like to report out of what we heard from each group. I was negligent in my task of identifying who's going to report out from my group, so I apologize. But if anyone would like to volunteer at this time, post discussion, please feel free to provide just a brief overview of some of the themes that we heard in our discussion. I saw Stephen raise his hand.
Yeah, I'll talk. I'm worried I took up too much time in Margaret,
Oh,
but anyway.
No, you did not. That was perfect. It was perfect.
We had some common themes of a strong desire for equity, a recognition that when it comes to transit versus driving, it's more than just a financial trade-off, that often there's a much larger investment of time that is required to use transit, and that is inequitable. So definitely a strong desire to protect the vulnerable populations among us. As an operator, I'm really curious to see how we're going to connect land use and transportation planning, because that's been a missing piece. And as an operator, I'll be one of the people responsible for implementing whatever this transit vision plan is. And if transit operators are not given any opportunity to shape land use, we're going to arrive at a playing field that's stacked against us. And we're not going to be able to make effective use of public funding to deliver the equitable service that our community is looking for. Environmental objectives are also a big theme that was discussed, and those go hand in hand.
Anything Stephen missed from our group? Great summary, Stephen. All right, I'm going to hand it off to Tim's group.
Yeah, Kevin McDermott was volunteered to report out. So Kevin, the floor is yours.
Sure, thanks. I'm Kevin McDermott, Albemarle County. Some of the things we talked about that we'd like to get out of this plan are one, to try and figure out a little bit more of a sense of what the community wants out of transit. Also, we had one of our providers there, Garland, was in our group, and he and I both agreed that we'd really like to see how the existing providers that we have, because we have the three providers in our region, how they can work together better, how they can look at transit holistically throughout the region and define all those roles that each one might fill. If there needs to be some sort of like better coordination or consolidation plan, how to start moving towards that. We're looking for an actionable plan with that achieves our overall vision and at enhancing transit, trying to establish regional consensus on the transit vision, identifying opportunities and targeted needs for the community. And also looking at potential new technologies in transit. Also concern for equity issues and making sure that we're reaching out to those that are typically silent, but maybe really dependent on transit in the region. I think is an important piece of this plan. and also reaching out to the business community and trying to bring them on board with what we want to do with transit in the region, and identifying champions among them and in the community. I think that about covers it.
Thanks, Kevin.
All right, should we go on to Chris?
Yeah. So I'll report out for the group. There are a couple different themes that came out of the discussion. One, which has been discussed before, a fair amount is the need to get all of the providers to working as seamlessly as possible, so that there's a regional vision in terms of transit. Trevor talked about Albemarle County and sort of the challenges of serving sort of a very diverse county with a significant urbanized area, but then the rest of the county very rural. So the need and how do we serve both parts of those counties, two parts of the counties with very different needs. Marta talked about a growing demographic of seniors in the region and how do we serve them and serve their specific needs. Sarah, Christine, and Sandy representing TJPDC were also in the chat room, and so I gave them the opportunity to speak as well. Christine talked about the need to build consensus and how the PDC's role in building that consensus and the importance of the PDC in building that consensus. Sarah talked about the need for multimodal connections and the understanding of how a trip is made, all of the different modes within a single trip. And Sandy brought up how does transit support climate action and other goals for development. And it gets back to someone mentioned land use, transit, the connection between land use and transit. So hopefully I did a reasonable job of reporting back what people talked about. So I'll turn it over to Will.
Yeah. Scudder, how about your group?
So we did not identify anyone to speak up for the group in the session. So I will ask anyone from my group who wants to speak up to speak up on behalf of the group. But before any of you volunteer, I think the one thing I will say is we did hear some thoughts and concerns in the group about the inclusiveness of this stakeholder group relative to existing transit riders, and needing to potentially follow up with that a list of existing riders that we talked about earlier, perhaps doing focus groups with those folks to be sure that we're being very inclusive of existing riders. So I think that's a really important point and of discussion to think about. Anyone else who participated in our group want to take on saying what else we heard?
Yes, just to to piggyback on that being a point of just pointing it out, but we also it was mentioned that everyone that's at the table, if you haven't already ridden the city transit, that it would be a good time to perhaps do that to at least experience it. I know Will is on the board in Louisa, and he's bringing sort of an outline county perspective to making this a regional focus. And Samuel has the portfolio of the transit department, as a city department head. So we had a very diverse group of people at the table. We did mostly introductions to just, figure out why we were all together at this breakout group, but, that was good. And again, I emphasized about the inclusion of the existing riders as a part of being a stakeholder and not outside the group, reporting in through indirect, channels.
Thanks, Edward. I appreciate that. Anyone else from our group want to add anything that we heard? I'll just mention that we heard interest in transit being a bridge for economic, allowing better opportunities for job access, mobility in general, and also mobility for those who have mobility challenges, disabled or even partially have walking challenges or moving challenges as an important factor. And the importance of housing affordability and how transit can play a role in an overall approach to addressing housing affordability in the region. I think that's most of what we heard.
I think that just leaves Vlad's group.
Yeah, good morning. Is there anyone from our group that wanted to volunteer to share thoughts? You probably didn't take notes, so I can do that and invite you to join in if I'm missing anything. So our group, we talked about the, get my notes here, concern that the plan makes sense, that it is coherent with existing plans and service, that this vision plan, particularly that it not be at the price of existing service or conflicting with existing service or plans. That's particularly Juan Lee from CAT, that we need unity and cohesion among all the studies, one thought process here. We also had Hal from Fluvanna, Jaunt representative, and he emphasized that rural transportation should have a major aspect in this process, both intra-county and commuter service to the various employment areas in the rural areas. Caetano de Campos Lopez of C3 said we need to ensure that there's extensive community engagement at every stage of the process, and that we must be open to rethink potential change to achieve a system that both serves our needs, but is also environmentally sensitive and improves air quality. And we also had Jim Fries from Charlottesville Neighborhood Development Services. If there's anything I missed, please let me know, add your thoughts to it.
Great. Any final comments from Vlad's group? All right, great. Well, thank you so much for that. We're going to move on to Scudder's presentation. I will make a quick note. The breakout groups was a random generator of sending people out. If you would like to move around groups, you can do a private chat to Matthew, and Matthew can reassign you to another group if you want to go kind of mix with other people for the second breakout that we'll have later on in the process. But otherwise, we'll move it on to Scudder. Floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Will. Appreciate everyone's time this morning. I want to walk through quickly, giving you a little bit of background based on two documents that we've produced, which are on the project website, the Land Use Assessment and Transit Propensity Analysis, which gives everyone some background on the markets and needs for transit, and the land use plans and development plans across the region and how they might be supportive of transit long term. But in a really bigger picture, I want to go beyond what's really in those technical analysis and kind of nest those factors in some key thoughts about how that might relate to your values for transit, some of which you've talked about already, and potential trade-offs in what you prioritize. So when we are thinking first, I want to just get a sense of from you all, how could better or expanded or improved transit service improve your life? Or you can also think about this question as improve the lives of people you represent at your organizations or your jurisdictions. This is identical to a question we're asking in the public survey to get people's input about how they perceive transit service. So Matt, if you could go ahead and launch the poll. These questions are phrased, or these answers are phrased as I could do. You can think about this as people I represent could do these things, and you can pick up to 3 of these. So you or people you represent could reach more or better job and career opportunities with better transit service, or save time commuting to work, or get out and see friends or family more often or more easily with better transit service, more easily get to stores and services and meet basic needs with better transit service. You or people you represent could live without a car, or could live with only 1 car in your household. Perhaps you could reach school, college, or other educational opportunities more easily. Or more parks and recreational facilities to be able to enjoy nature, to get out and exercise, and so on. Or could get out to social events and activities and be connected to the social life of the community. So these are all things that transit could do to make your life better, and could improve your ability to be a part of the community with better transit service. And we'd like to get a sense of what you or people you represent might say are the things that will be most valuable out of better transit service. So Matt, do we have most of these? Do we have answers in for most of these? Go ahead and answer, folks, if you can.
And we got a few more left.
62% have responded.
All right. And again, this today in this meeting, this is really just to get a kind of initial sense of y'all's perspective. The public survey, which you all can take, and we encourage everyone to take, and we encourage you to tell everyone you know to take, will really be an opportunity to weigh in more officially through that option. And I see we have a comment that it could be all the above. Yes, it could be all the above. We're asking here for you to pick your top 3 at this particular moment. So we get that answered.
The comment also, it would be great to add, I could do my part to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions in our community.
Okay.
Might be a good one to add.
We are at 80%.
Okay. So I think we can close it at this point if we've got 80% of people answer, because I think probably the other 20% are staff.
Yeah.
So we see a lot of could get to better job opportunities. We see a lot of people saying your family could live with fewer cars or live without a car, which is a significant value for people to not have the expense of a car. We see a lot of not having to deal with traffic and not having to find parking. We see a lot of easily get to more stores and services to meet basic needs. So one of the reasons that we've asked this is, next slide, Will, is that transit is often asked to meet a whole bunch of different goals. And so that question is asking you about some potentially different goals and priorities that you might want transit to do for you or for people you support. And one of the challenges we face in transit is that sometimes prioritizing some of those goals means we do less of other goals in meeting those goals. So for example, I've color coded these goals now by if we are maximizing our investment in getting people out of cars with transit or supporting dense and walkable development, if that is the thing we're maximizing as much as possible, that may not be, and it may mean we put less priority on spreading service across the entire region or to every potential town or neighborhood across the region. So that challenge is one that we need to think clearly about as we're thinking about this vision and thinking about, how much do we prioritize? How much of the, potential future budget of your transit system do you put towards some of these different goals? Because sometimes maximizing one will mean less emphasis on another. And as a starting point for thinking about transit, I want to also emphasize something that we'll come back to very often in helping you all imagine what transit can do. by thinking about how transit affects people and people's opportunities. So imagine this is a person. This is a person, and they're in a city, a town full of possible places they could reach, full of potential destinations. And this gray area, this is the area that she can get to in a certain amount of time. Here we said 45 minutes by transit and walking. And then when we look at what all is in that area, the number of jobs, the number of grocery stores, the number of schools, all shopping opportunities, all of those things, that's her access to jobs, her access to opportunity. And when we're thinking about transit, this thinking about how much are we improving access to all of these kinds of things is really fundamental to thinking, to understanding, is what we're doing going to make transit more useful for lots of potential trips that people want to make to access all sorts of things. So when we think about this question, where can you be soon? Where can you be in 30 or 45 minutes or an hour? You're kind of asking the same question as where could you work? Because if it takes more than an hour one way to get somewhere, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to rely on that as a reasonable commute time to get somewhere. And so it's very unlikely you're going to be able to hold a job that's more than an hour trip one way. So it's about where you can work, where you can play, where you can study. If the school is more than an hour away by transit, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to be able to reliably go there, particularly if you're trying to hold a job and go to community college, for example. So this is the same kind of question as, all of these, where you can visit, who you can meet, and ultimately, how free are you to access all of the opportunities? So right now, this example map here is looking at from a point in Charlottesville as an example of what you can reach today with today's transit network in 10, 20, 30, or 45 minutes. And we've put this here near the hospital because this example is showing you today how far you can get from one of the places with some of the best transit service in the region. And as you can see, you can't even reach the farthest edges of kind of the urbanized area around Charlottesville and Albemarle. You can't reach Pantops. You can't reach very far up Highway 29 because of a couple of factors about the transit system. And when we're thinking about this, next slide, if we want to grow those areas that people can reach in a reasonable amount of time, the most efficient access expanding service is service that's frequent, reasonably reliable and fast, and available when you need it, meaning that the span of service, it's available in the evening, it's available on the weekends. And if we want it to be the most efficient in terms of costs of service relative to the number of people we're serving, then we're going to focus that where there are a lot of peoples and activities that can benefit. That's an important point I'll come back to in a minute. Now, I've particularly underlined frequency there because frequency is really a central element to whether or not service is useful and will get you very far. Higher frequency service means transit is coming soon. And that has three really important benefits: less waiting, easier connections, and reduced impacts from disruption. And so we have in nonlinear payoffs from that, meaning the higher the frequency you get, the more net positive benefits you get. And frequency is something that's kind of hard to explain for people who don't use transit much, because there's not a very obvious thing that you experience as someone who's driving around very often of the challenge of frequency. You might experience, for example, waiting at a stoplight for 3 minutes as a particularly long delay if you're driving around. But if you're waiting for an every 30-minute bus or an every hour bus, you can think of that experience as like the gate at the end of your driveway. And if there's a gate at the end of your driveway that only opens once an hour, that is the same sort of experience as relying on a once an hour bus. You had best be in your car with your coffee, ready to go. And if you have to leave your house at 7 a.m. and hope that the gate operator hits the timing right so that you can get out at 7 a.m. Otherwise, you aren't getting out until 8 a.m. and you'll probably be late for work. And that happens 2 or 3 times a month, and you're in trouble. So that's the experience of very low frequency service to a transit rider. And next slide. When we're looking at the existing transit system, and again, this is focused at this particular point on Charlottesville and Albemarle because of the detail we can show in this map. But this map is color coded by frequency, dark blue being every 30 minutes, green being every 60 minutes, red, which you can't really even see because there's only one every 15-minute line. So this is showing us that for the current system, most of what's out there today is a service that comes every 30 minutes or every 60 minutes, which means it's pretty hard to rely on that to get somewhere very quickly, because if you miss a bus, you have a very long wait, or if you're trying to transfer between transit services, you may have a very long wait, particularly if it's not a timed connection. And if we look, there are some corridors, for example, along US 29, where the combination of different routes at times gives you somewhat higher frequency, along 5th Street, for example. But even then, the combination isn't always consistently giving you the particularly high frequency across really long corridors of the region to connect lots of destinations. So there's a lot of waiting out there today, which is a big reason why it's hard to use transit to get very far very quickly in the region. If we zoom out a bit and look a little more at the coverage of service across the region, this map is starting to show you more of the lines, for example, jaunt services that head farther outside of the urbanized area, that reach into Crozet, that reach farther north along US 29. And so you start to see some of the regional coverage, which is also fairly limited in its reach. Particularly when you're talking about all-day services that you could rely on in the middle of the day or the evening or on weekends, for example, to get across the region. So in addition to having relatively limited frequency, there is, when you look at the regional scale, of course, also somewhat limited coverage of the whole region. And if we're thinking about this in terms of trying to maximize access for as many people as possible, we also need to start we have to think about, how do we efficiently reach as many people as possible? Then we have to start thinking about land use factors that make a big difference in whether we can reach people easily. And that comes down to three really critical factors. Density. If we're extending service, if we're adding service, if we're expanding service, going to a place that is more dense means we're serving more people per dollar spent. So this example in the upper half of this diagram is showing you 2 buses on a line serving a lot of people because there's a lot of houses. And so within each stop, there are twice as many people as there is in the lower half of this diagram. Both of these routes in this fictional place, they have 2 buses on them. So they cost the same to run, they cost the same to purchase the buses. But of course, the one in the upper diagram is reaching a lot more people than the one in the lower diagram. And so density plays an enormous role in how many people we can reach relative to the cost, and therefore how useful we can be to people relative to the cost. And when we look across the region, of course, it's no surprise that in Charlottesville, in the immediate environs around Charlottesville and Albemarle, and then a bit to the north along US Highway 29 and out towards Crozet, you see those are the areas that have the highest density and would therefore have the highest potential to reach a lot of people with improved frequency or improved and expanded service. So residents on the left, the density of residents, and then on the right, density of jobs. Jobs obviously make a difference, not just because people commute to work, but jobs also represent places that people want to go. Hospitals have a lot of jobs that people want to work at. Hospitals have a lot of services that people need to reach in order to meet their medical needs. Shopping centers have lots of jobs that people want to work at. They also have a lot of services that people need to reach: pharmacies, grocery stores, et cetera. So jobs density tells us a lot about potential for destinations for trips of all kinds. Next. We've also looked at, and again, this is summarized in those two memos I was mentioning, planned future growth areas, because this vision is not just about what's on the ground today, it's also about, what your region is growing into over the long term. And so, we're looking at what are the growth areas over the long term, how much are they going to grow? So how likely will they be to be significant drivers of demand for transit over the long term as the region expands, as the region grows. Next slide. Walkability is another critical factor. If you have a whole lot of density, but your street network is not well connected, that means it's really hard to get to transit stops. So in the left side of this diagram, the upper half, places where you have well-connected streets means bus stops serve lots of people, transit stops serve lots of people who can walk to them. The lower half of the diagram, where you have disconnected streets, a bus stop and kind of in the middle of a community will reach fewer people, even if it's the same level of density. And you've also got to be able to cross streets. The vast majority of people who reach transit are reaching transit by walking, even in suburban areas and often even in rural areas. And if you can't safely cross the street, then you only have service in one direction effectively. And so we can assess things like that street connectivity. And this map, again, in the transit propensity memo, looks at that factor of walkability. But then there are also a whole range of other more qualitative factors that aren't as easy to quantify and assess, such as the safety and sense of safety in crossing streets. And as you get into rural areas or into suburban areas, the safety of being able to cross the street is often an even bigger factor, but particularly on larger, wider roads and highways like US 29 or rural 2-lane roads. Next slide. One other important factor to think about as we're looking at where can transit serve lots of people effectively and quickly is, can we run in reasonably straight lines? So in this upper diagram, you've got houses, you've got college, you've got a shopping center, you've got offices, all on a reasonably straight line where we can run a transit vehicle pretty quickly. And people feel like they can get where they're going in a pretty straight line. The lower half of this diagram is showing you what happens when you have offices back on a cul-de-sac, a shopping center behind a quarter mile of parking. And to actually reach those destinations, your transit lines have to deviate off of the main road. And that costs more time for your transit service to get to and from those places. It also just makes people feel like they're going way out of their way. And so that makes it less cost effective for us to be able to serve it well. And it makes it challenging then to encourage people to use service because they often feel like they're going in circles as opposed to really getting where they want to go. And so an example, next slide, of where you see some of the challenges today is like in the Pantops area, for example, where the Social Security office is in an office park kind of set back from the highway, where the hospital is kind of off on a bit of a cul-de-sac, about a half mile off the highway. You have two grocery stores set back pretty far. You have some apartments to the north and pretty far off of the road. And so to really serve all of those and get to those pretty important destinations, you've got to deviate a good bit in order to reach them. And that takes people really far out of their way. So all of these factors tell us a good bit about where can transit be the most effective, they're also signals to you all as stakeholders in the community about how to, over the long term, build communities that are the most transit friendly and accessible in conjunction with this vision that we're going to develop. Because of course, this vision is about setting where you want to go with your transit system, but it's also about hopefully setting a new vision for how that transit system and the land use planning that you're doing can be better integrated over the long term. So a really critical reason about doing, about thinking about this and these land use drivers of ridership and of transit usefulness is that the transit network that maximizes access is the transit network that's going to be really useful for any particular trip someone wants to make, be it for work, be it for shopping, be it for getting to the doctor. And maximizing access by transit improves access to economic opportunity, personal freedom. It also has an effect on the value of investment in more walkable communities. And generally, it tells us a lot about how much better the city and the region can function because it is the kind of thing that will lead more people to get out of cars as you improve that. But this raises a challenge as we're thinking about if maximizing access is the primary thing or the only thing you want to do, because it may not be the only thing you want to do. The things highlighted in green here are the kind of values and goals that align with maximizing access, getting as many people to jobs as quickly as possible, encouraging people to get out of their cars, reducing congestion, supporting dense and walkable development. All of those things align very closely with transit investments that are maximizing access. But if we're really wanting to think more about making sure as many people as possible in the region have some access to transit service, if we're really worried about making sure that there's a reasonably equal distribution of service across the entire region, those are things that don't align with maximizing access because they're asking us to do something different, which is spread service out as opposed to concentrating it to make it more frequent. And that raises this, what we call a ridership coverage trade-off. And a way to visualize and think about this at a high level is to imagine that you are collectively, this group, you are the transit agency board for this little fictional town on the right. And I'm your transit planner, and we have 18 buses, and all of these dots are people and jobs in the town, and all of these streets are streets that we can run on. How do we decide to distribute the service we have, or or what we can spend of these 18 buses? So if you were going to ask me to maximize access, which is also a thing that maximizes ridership, I would say, let's put 9 buses each on 2 really frequent routes on those 2 main roads where 70% of people and jobs are. That would mean you've got service every 10 minutes or better on these 2 roads. And therefore, those 70% of people are very likely to find the service useful and very likely to use it. And we're going to be supporting dense and walkable development on those 2 major streets. We're going to get a lot of people out of cars, reducing emissions and reducing vehicle miles traveled. We're also going to get the lowest, subsidy cost per rider for transit, if that's a concern for you. But many people in the community might say, well, we're not serving 30% of the people here. There's folks who can't reach transit, and that is not fair. And I would say, if you've told me to maximize access, then this is what you do, but that's not the only goal and only priority you might have for transit. So another goal, of course, is to try to ensure that we have lifeline minimum level of some access for everyone. There's a goal of making sure that everyone who pays in, for example, is getting something out as a public service. And those are the things that align with what we would call more coverage-oriented goals for transit. And if that was your primary goal, I would say, take your 18 buses and spread them across 9 routes, serving almost every street in your community, so that there's a bus stop near everyone. The downside is that now, since we've got 18 buses, the service is maybe only every hour on most of these streets. So far fewer people find the service useful, and far fewer people would be willing to use it. But we have said our goal here is not maximizing ridership or maximizing access, it's maximizing coverage. And so the really big challenge is that, of course, both of these goals are important. Almost everyone I talk to when we talk about transit goals and priorities say, well, I want to do both. And the challenge, of course, is that these two examples show the extremes, but they help us think about the fact that asking us to do goals on the left leads us to design a network and design and prioritize transit investments that do one set of things and go in one direction. Focusing on more coverage-oriented goals leads us to do very different things. And so a really important thing is, as we're talking about goals and priorities, is to think about, ultimately, we probably want some sort of balance between these two. But it's important to think clearly about, do you want to invest most of your investment in maximizing access and ridership? Do you want to invest maybe half in that and half in coverage? Or do you want to invest more in coverage and less in maximizing access and ridership? Because, as a statement of your values, your investment level over the long term is what, will basically guide this balance between these goals. So why this matters, and I appreciate the time to kind of give you this baseline, is that, as we're thinking about goals, as we're thinking about a vision statement for what guides this plan, it's really important to consider this geometric reality. Because if we develop, say, a vision statement or a goal statement that says our transit system will be highly efficient and serving everyone, well, that's almost self-contradictory. And that's kind of like sitting in the back of a taxi and telling your driver to turn left and right at the same time. It's physically impossible. So we want to be thoughtful about, what do we mean by efficient? Do we mean cost effective? And how much do you want to invest in that side of this value statement? And what do you mean by serving everyone? Do we want to serve every single person in the region? Do we want to serve 80%, 90%, or people that live at a certain minimum density, and so on? Because those help us then resolve that balance between these goals, so that we can design a plan and a vision for you all that balances these goals in a way that you want them balanced. So next slide is a poll question here about some of those goal statements that I mentioned earlier, about what are the most important benefits that transit service can achieve, which help us think through some of these priorities that sometimes come in conflict with each other. And so we're going to launch this poll and let you all think about how, what are the highest priorities for you all, but also take this time to do some questions and answers about what I've talked about and your thoughts or questions. So I know I've seen a couple of things pop up in the chat, and Chris, I think you've been looking at the chat and possibly could raise up some of these questions, or Will, or whoever's been looking at the chat.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you, Scudder. Let me just identify some of the points people have been bringing up. There's one specific question. Mostly it's been people sort of responding to what's been talked about. Mr. Gentry, who is on the Louisa County Board of Supervisors, mentioned his biggest priority is serving the needs of rural counties. Related to Scudder's discussion of walkability, Mr. De Campos Lopez brought up the idea that even though a stop may be, as the crow flies, accessible, to a certain population. The lack of sidewalks, the lack of safe crosswalks makes that sort of a deficient measure, and you have to look at what's the state of the pedestrian network.
Yeah, let me just really quickly think.
Sure.
So I think thinking about rural area parts of the region, I think a useful thing for everyone to consider is, resolving this balance between ridership and coverage can be something that's thought about at a regional level, but it can also be thought about at an individual jurisdiction level, because each jurisdiction makes funding decisions about how it invests in transit. And so this doesn't have to be something that's resolved by the entire region as one question for the region. It can be something that can be thought about by each jurisdiction that's funding service, as a way of putting in context of the balance within each jurisdiction. And yeah, whether or not you can actually reach a stop is absolutely important in thinking about that actual access.
Another point made was, again, and something that's was identified before, was the need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and how does transit fit into that? Mr. Gentry followed up and indicated that he sees very little vision beyond Charlottesville and Albemarle, so that will be something we'll consider as we move forward.
I think I see some folks raising the question of on-demand services as a possible way. So an important point to make is that the part of the reason this challenge of competing priorities exists is that the primary cost of transit over the long term is the operating cost, and most of that is the wage cost of operating the service. So smaller vehicles, on-demand services have somewhat lower costs because they're smaller, but not dramatically lower than fixed route services. They may be 20, 30% sometimes lower than fixed route services per hour of service you're providing and so on. But that's not as dramatic a difference as the difference, for example, a lot of on-demand services get perhaps 2 riders per hour of service that they provide. Reasonably effective fixed route services can get 8 or 10 boardings per service hour. So the difference in cost doesn't make up for that difference in productivity of services quite often. And that's why this question is still a challenge for even when we're thinking about on-demand services.
Thanks, sir. And then there was one final question just posted, and it was, and I'm not a funding expert, so hopefully someone can answer this. Have state and federal transit funding priorities shifted to reward ridership more so than coverage?
I would say federal priorities have not changed dramatically. The federal funding formulas have mostly stayed the same for the last decade or more. And there's a mixture of emphasis on coverage by distributing dollars based on population. And a small part of the formula does emphasize ridership, but it is a smaller part of the formula. State formulas have shifted a little bit in terms of emphasizing ridership in the last 10 years or so. I think Stephen had his hand raised.
I was going to say, yeah, just we got to take a quick break. We're going to take a 5-minute break here just to stay on schedule. But Matthew, if you're ready to share the poll results, what we're going to do is, if you could, folks can turn off their cameras and go on mute, and take about 5 minutes just to stretch. If you need to take a rest or grab a quick snack or something, we will come back at 10:30. So we'll get back in here at 10:30, and we'll try to get the poll responses posted so you can see those responses when you get back from break.
Thanks, Will.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. It's 10:30, so folks could, if you're back at your computer, you could turn your webcam back on. Just let us know that you're back. This is just another reminder, the project website. Scudder had alluded to this or brought this up several times throughout the workshop, but if you could visit the project website, we have surveys on there that you can take, and we'd love to get your feedback. A lot of really good advice in terms of where we can post the survey and where we can get that information out, which we will use that advice. I want to thank some other folks from the consultant team who are on here too. Matthew is launching the polls and doing a lot of IT work in the background. And thank you for all the work that you're doing. Donna Eichen was taking notes in our group, and I can see her notes on a shared document that we have, and she was typing feverishly. So please know that when we go into breakout groups, we have someone who's typing fast and getting everything that we're hearing, getting it documented. So I thank all of you for your time. Scudder, we're looking at the survey responses here. Any reactions?
Well, I see the highest rated response is helping low-income people access jobs and services. So a thing I would point out in thinking about the challenge of balancing, access maximizing goals and ridership goals versus coverage goals is that, low-income people quite often are busy, and so more frequent service is often a key feature of helping low-income people get to jobs and services in a reasonable amount of time. So, a more access maximizing system is one that will do a lot of good in that respect. But you also factor that against the challenge of there may be a number of low-income people who live in hard to reach places or pockets of low-income communities that are in hard to reach places that may push us in doing something that is a bit more coverage oriented, going to places that aren't that dense maybe, but or aren't that walkable. And that's a real challenge we've seen in communities where poverty has started to become more suburban. And we see a lot of, I think the next highest rated answer was improving air quality and reducing environmental impacts of travel. So that suggests, getting people out of cars is a high priority. And it looks like the third highest rated is supporting dense and walkable development and redevelopment, which is part of both a short and long-term strategy for transit to be part of a regional transportation and land use vision for the region.
All right.
Can I just interject real quickly on that, because I checked that box too, and it's kind of something that we like to do, but from personal experience, I worked at State Farm Insurance 15 years ago, and for 17 years, there's 1,500 people in that building, and bragged about being the largest private employer in the area. Had 30 vans that came in from the rural areas to help people get to work. And then today, they sold the building. It's not in Charlottesville anymore, and everybody works from home. And I was just wondering, how will you factor in the different ways that people are working in this time period versus, obviously we all said, help low-income people get to work more, but, I tend to think of a robust transportation systems. A good friend has worked for Metro in DC for years at the management level, but these are professional level people that use the transit system to get to work because they live in high density cities.
Yeah. Well, at a very high level, a transit system that is going to be very useful for connecting a lot of low-income people to jobs is generally a transit system that is very frequent, has long hours of service into the evening and on weekends, because a lot of lower income people are working in service and retail jobs that, all hands on deck on weekends in retail particularly. But the upside is that if that is reasonably frequent across the whole day, that is also a transit system that can be very useful for a whole lot of other people who are working in downtown at UVA, who are working in the Martha Jefferson Hospital. It can be particularly useful for a whole range of people. And so I would encourage everyone to think about a transit system that does about 80% of what you personally think would be really great, and what is about 80% of what the university thinks is great and the hospital thinks is great, is a system that's going to be generally useful for a whole lot of people. A transit system that's designed 100% to meet the needs of exactly what the university wants, or exactly what the hospital wants, or exactly what any individual industry wants, is generally something that then is less useful for a whole lot of other people. So As we craft this vision, think about it in those terms of, a generally useful system is one that isn't going to be perfectly aligned with your particular needs, but hopefully meets a lot of your needs.
Thank you. Good. Well explained.
Okay. So we are going to try to build off of Scudder. Thank you for I love your presentations, by the way, and I think that's something that I hope that we're as we go into this next part of our discussion of going back to this choice, or how there are these decisions that are going to affect how the transit system looks and functions, and trying to look at goals in a more detailed way is what we're going to do coming up here next. I do want to acknowledge the Regional Transit Partnership. As I mentioned, we had the study at the PDC back in 2016, and they had a strategic retreat in 2018, and during that they laid out what's our strategic plan moving forward. What is it that we need to accomplish? This transit visioning process was one of those actions in the strategic plan moving forward. As a starting point, during that retreat, the RTP had come up with a starting point of a vision, which then would be expanded on and detailed out in an upcoming process, which is a process we're in now. That was the Charlottesville Region's transit system, the vision being an efficient, high quality, integrated regional network of transit services that provides all residents with access to employment opportunities in a way that minimizes congestion, maximizes the region's reputation as the best place to live, work, learn, and play. So that was an initial statement put together to help guide this next step of the vision planning process. And as we've mentioned before, and again, tried to hit on this throughout our discussion this morning, but how the regional transit vision plan here is focused on developing a guide for long-term 10 to 20 years that will help to determine investments in transit in terms of coordinating the different service providers in the different localities to try to get them together around that single vision with clear decisions of measuring and evaluating what are our goals. Of the many things that the transit system can do, what are our priority areas? And what I mentioned before of AECOM and the rest of the team went through as many plans as we could find to try to identify, acknowledge, integrate as many planning efforts in the past as we could find that were transit related, and made a detailed inventory of that. So through reviewing that, we identified a few areas, some goal areas that we would like for you all to discuss. We're going to do another poll on this too. I will just review these with you all briefly, and then once I get to the end, Matthew's going to launch the poll on this. But some of those goal areas, we came up with 6 from what we could find from existing documents and efforts and discussions. One is enhance, provide high quality and high frequency transit options to the busiest parts of the region. So Scudder was focusing on that during his presentation, referring back to what he had reviewed there. Expand the region's transit service to more neighborhoods, towns, and places, and increase basic transit connectivity. So expanding out to more areas. I know Willie Gentry was mentioning rural areas that could be part of that. Collaborate, improve internal and external communication with the transit agencies, with local governments to increase transit supportive land use decisions. Scudder was also mentioning that it's not just how you design and consider your transit system, but that vision should be integrated into the local business of the localities, because how you lay out land uses and how you grow as communities can very much influence how the transit system functions. Improve equity, we heard that in our initial breakout groups. It's come up again and again. But improve transit access for people with low income, limited physical ability, and lack of access to automobiles. Support is to enhance the region's economy and economic well-being of its residents by improving access to employment opportunities and community services. And then we heard this one a lot too. Number 6 is sustainability and climate. So minimize the environmental impact of the region's transportation system. Matthew will launch the poll. What we ask you to do, again, in this exercise, this is kind of to prep you for breakout groups. We're about to go into that, but if you could please review these. And again, identify 3. We realize that these are all priorities. These are all priorities, but what are the 3 areas that are your personal highest priorities? And the results of that are going to help guide us in our discussions. Chris, are there any comments in the chat? Anything we need to discuss while folks are filling out the survey, the poll?
Sorry, I keep muting myself. No, nothing specific since the last discussion.
Okay.
Do you think, this is Diantha, just a quick note that someone asked in the chat if the surveys were going to be translated or were translated in Spanish, which I thought was a great question. I wasn't sure of the answer, so just to throw that.
Yes, we will actively look into that to ensure that that's an opportunity, a possibility.
Great, Christine, thank you.
We're about 58 those who participated. Scott, anything else to add to these statements, or any clarifications or fleshing out?
No, I just nothing to add to these statements. I just want to note that, it is always hard to choose between priorities that we all think are really important. The intention, of course, is not to say that to ignore any of these. We just want to get input from the start about how much emphasis to place on some of these different priorities as we're starting to craft this vision. So that is, the intention of this discussion now and this initial survey with the public is to help guide that initial setting of priorities among these, very important potential goals.
I do see a question here about sort of the future of work and projected generational changes that may shift values kind of over the next 10 to 20 years around transit, and how we, kind of in the post COVID world. And I think, I guess what we're seeing in the DC area is sort of that less, probably across the country as well, but sort of that less emphasis on the commuter, sort of peak travel, but more providing service throughout the day. I think that conversation is still going on, as we're still very well still within the pandemic. Obviously, we're on a Zoom call right now. So Scudder, do you have any additional thoughts about kind of that shift? And
I think that, that is exactly what we are seeing in many communities, is less emphasis on rush hour commute services for office workers, as people coming back from the pandemic are going to the office less often or not at all, and working remotely all the time, particularly for longer distance trips at peak times. That is becoming less of an emphasis in a lot of communities, and that pushes us in the direction of emphasizing more all-day transit service as opposed to peak-only services, which ultimately I think is generally going to be more valuable for the community overall. It also is there's a great deal of inefficiency in peak-oriented services due to the way driver shifts get organized when you're focusing a lot of service just at peak times. So there is long-term potential value in de-emphasizing peak-only services.
Well, we are about to go into groups. I think you can do a final check on that. Scudder, we shared the results of the last poll, this one too. It looks like we're seeing some common themes, but any reactions to that?
Looks like the highest rated goal here is improving equity, improving transit access for people with low income, limited physical mobility, or lack of access to automobiles, which is a very valuable and important goal. The second highest rated here, it looks like collaborating, so improving communication with agencies and local governments, increasing transit supportive land use decisions, which is absolutely essential for the long term, because transit, as I talked about, useful transit service or access by transit is a function of both the transit system you create and the land use you build around it. And so we can create a much more useful transit system in the short term by expanding service, investing in more frequent service in a lot of places, and you as a region can then create even more access for people over the long term by building your communities in ways that connect well with that transit network, with the density, the walkability of the built environment that you create over the next 20 to 30 years. And that's a huge thing for the long term. And with your affordable housing programs as well. That's another factor to think carefully about.
Definitely. Great. Well, Matthew, are we ready to go with the breakouts? Oh, we got Willie Gentry has his hand up.
Yeah, I'd just like to point out, you talk about the top three, the bottom one at 33% was expansion, and that's not a very good sign for the rural areas. You see where my theme is, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And that we want you to talk about that in the breakout. So what we're gonna do, I put all 6 into the chat so that we can all refer to it, but we're gonna break folks out, and we do want everyone to talk in their groups to have a more intimate discussion here of what are the most important goals and why. So Willie, of hitting on that in your group, to have what's missing. So of these 6, is there some glaring omission here? What's a goal area that you feel is missing from this? And third is in your groups to talk about what's your personal vision? What's your vision for the transit system, of looking at these goals and seeing what you've seen so far, hearing Scudder's presentation as well. What would be your vision for the transit system? And we're gonna go out into discussions for about 15 minutes. So we're at 10:50, so that would be 11:05, and then we're gonna come back, and then we're gonna have group discussion. We're gonna report back. So find somebody in your group who's willing to describe what you've discussed. And we want to hear from everybody in that plenary when we come back together, and talk through what we're able to get to in our groups. So Matthew, if you're ready, I think we can jump to groups.
Hey.
Hey there. You beat the crowd.
I think I accidentally got knocked out of my thing, but I guess they're coming back any minute now.
Yeah, it's about 30 seconds now. All
right.
Yeah.
Raya, I love how you volunteered Susan the second we got dumped off the call.
Yes, not
Like,
even a chance to respond. It's
at the
all-
buzzer. That was perfect.
So I assume we're waiting for everybody to come back in.
Yeah, I think
we might be about all back.
Yeah, I think we're all back now. All right.
All right.
Well, we on the little breakout, we were listed as group 1. So Susan, I think we can take the role of group 1.
All right. Yeah, our group mostly discussed how, first, that there is some nuance in how some of these visions and goals are articulated, both on environmental side and housing and access sides, that it's not quite as clear cut as like one being prioritized over another. Some of them are so fully integrated, and there's different understandings of what environmental impacts we're trying to solve, the transit system itself versus our cars or travel period in our community. Also, we really talked about a key strategy being not just making sure our transit agencies are talking to each other, but making sure our other agencies and our other planning in our community is talking to this vision, and that we're collaborating there around housing, around our climate action planning process and goals, around counties collaborating with each other. So it's more than just our transit agency collaborating, but other collaboration and planning that's happening in the community, and making sure this vision is well integrated into that, and that they are integrating our vision into their process. Also, yeah, I feel like I missed something there, but I think that's the sum of it.
We did touch on the rural areas just.
Oh yeah, also rural areas and county collaboration being really important. And Stephen made a great point about being a Dillon rule state and needing to start thinking ahead now about is there additional authority we're going to need to advocate for from the General Assembly in order to implement our vision, and that the planning should include the vision should include an implementation plan, not just a vision.
Great summary. Great job. Tim.
Yeah, Garland, you volunteered to give the report out.
Thanks, Tim. So the group was a diverse group. So it's county planner, gentleman from the state, myself, actually 2 county planners, and then a supervisor. So we are looking at kind of some recurring themes that came up. But one of the major things was that transit must be useful with options. And how do we make good use of the systems that we have in place and make them most efficient? So we kept coming back to recurring themes of the top 3 being enhanced service, expanding, and collaboration. And then there was a sprinkle of, the equity component that is a kind of a buzzword. And I guess was it environmental? Jessica, was your other one?
I think my other one was support, but
Okay.
environmental is great too.
All right, thanks. So I think if we were there, the thought was if you do the expansion, if you do the enhancements and you do collaboration, the others will fall in place because you will have the foundational components to allow us to develop and expand upon to get really key, and the environmental components and the equity issues will hopefully solve them. But density was also a major theme, because the densities are here in our region are not like a Richmond. So when you equate density and frequencies, that's normally how you put together a hub and spoke system, or a system designed around very frequent transit lines. That's not necessarily going to fit every aspect of the Charlottesville region here, but we've got to figure out a way to expand upon and add new transit components to get to the rural portions of the counties. Did I cover everything?
Thanks, Garland. Yeah, I think you made a really good point. I think that deserves mentioning here, that this transit vision process it'll be an iterative process, and whatever we kind of decide on now, should and will be revisited, in the sort of medium term. So like 5-10 years, we should revisit it and build upon it. I think that covers it.
What about Vlad's group? You're still muted, Vlad.
Oh, who did you ask for?
Sorry about
Vlad.
Anyone want to volunteer my group, and I can fill in with a note? I'll get started, and please add in anything that I might have missed. So the first kind of question about which of the goals are most important, I think Juwan said it and other people echoed it, that it was really hard to choose. The top three all are very important. Hal noted, as Willie Gentry had said, that concern that the study is giving short shrift to rural communities, and just need to emphasize that it's not just within the getting people, commuters to the central area, Charlottesville, Albemarle, but it's intra-county transit, and don't make this so Charlottesville, Albemarle focused. But I think also Kelly said how to address rural elderly populations that may need to get to healthcare and things like that are important. Emily noted a news story that she posted that emphasized the need for odd hour service. So, people that may do shift work late at night at the hospital or other places, and just, not focusing everything on the 8 to 6 time frame. Caetano had an interesting point that the solutions may need to look at what we need to do differently, not just expand the same pattern we have as a default, but really look at more creative solutions, perhaps more on-demand service with smaller and more agile vehicles. James emphasized that we need to look at how we can integrate this plan into the city's comprehensive plan update that is going on right now. And I think Juwan, struck a note of unity in this, where how does the rural service work with what we have in Charlottesville? Don't have the rural and urban services working at cross purposes, but really how do you transfer and have them work to the same vision? And then Caetano emphasized the need to look beyond transit to focus on sidewalks, pedestrian bridges, and other connective elements that help people get to transit. So yeah, let me know any other thoughts from.
Cool. I just want to add that I also said that it would be interesting for us to have in this group. First of all, let me just say that I'm super happy with James being here, representing the city's NDS. And I think that having other staff as well, the planners or the decision makers that are going to decide where to place road expansions, where to place like crosswalks, sidewalks, pedestrian bridges for folks to be able to cross highway near a bus stop to actually make like the rule of the, oh, a person lives within 0.5 miles from the bus stop, then the person is covered. Yes, if there is a highway, not as much. So in order to be able to activate, to connect folks with the bus stops, I think that if we do not have the support of the planners that are going to make this decision, we can come up with excellent ideas here, but they're not going to be as effective. So I don't know how we can engage them in this process.
That came up a lot in our group too, of making sure that the vision and recommendations are integrated into other plans, housing plans, comp plans, and so forth. That it needs to be part of this system and not just a standalone document. That's great points. Chris,
I'm
how about
sorry.
your...
Oh.
May
I just say, I don't know how much of that is kind of as municipal staff show up if they're willing to, or it's a part of their duty, but I don't know who I should talk with, maybe the politician, to ask them to be here. But I don't think that it should be a matter of optional engagement. Like it's, I see it as a must. I don't know how we can make it clear for them. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, great points. Chris, how about your group?
I'll be very brief. I know we have some running out of time. One of the recommended additional goals was a larger pie, more funding, so we're not facing the challenges that Scudder talked about between coverage and frequency. A lot of the group focused on coverage and thought that that was very important. And only one other point I wanted to make was Marta was talking about equity, specifically related to seniors, and the fact that seniors often now it's so difficult for them to use it that they've opted out of transportation. They can't drive anymore. They don't have access to transit. They rely on friends to get to church or maybe to the doctor, but it really has a major effect on the quality of life of a large part of the population in the region. So I think that sums it up fairly well.
Scudder, I think you're the last group.
Sure. So I'll quickly summarize things, and anyone from our group, please feel free to add in. Pivoting off of one thing Chris said, Peter at the very end of our session mentioned, we're going to need community buy-in, particularly, political and community buy-in, because I think everyone has basically implied that this vision needs to have expanded service and more investment. And that's going to take, investment from the region and partners and localities. An important thing I think Edward and others pointed out were, Edward in particular has had experience as a transit writer in the past, but, he may not be using these services in the future. And we, all of the folks at the table here may not be users in the future, but need to be thinking about, the potential users and existing users. I think Peter also pointed out that, the old vision statement really emphasized employment, work opportunities as the primary use of transit, and we need to be thinking more broadly. Lloyd and Willie were talking a bit about, that need for rural transit, and in the context of, affordable housing across the region. Oftentimes right now, the affordable housing is in rural areas. And so that's a significant challenge. And in Louisa, Willie mentioned that a lot of people constantly are raising transportation access issues for all sorts of needs in rural areas. Julie mentioned that she's hearing in a lot of her talk with, community members that problems of poor frequency of service and, problems of not being able to reach certain areas, lack of coverage. So both of those big problems with existing services. So I think those are big takeaways that we heard in our group. Anyone want to add to that really quickly? Okay.
Okay, great. Well, we do have a little more discussion baked in here. We had just meeting debrief. I think Scudder, we had you to just kind of what are our takeaways?
Well, I think we have a couple of big takeaways here of, it sounds like they're from folks here at the table today, there is a great deal of interest in expanded and improved service across, as much of the region as possible. There's a great deal of interest in improved, sounds like improved frequency of service, and particularly in the urbanized areas of the region. There's also a significant interest in improved coverage and access to service in rural areas. There's a lot of interest I hear from folks about tying together long-term our transit investments in land use planning and housing, affordable housing planning, which is a really critical piece. There's still a lot of questions from folks about, particularly in this moment of uncertainty with coming out of the pandemic, what that means. And I think to some degree, we don't know for sure what it means. We can see some potential possibilities of what it might mean, but we are in a moment of a great deal of uncertainty about the future of work and the future of some different types of transit demand. And we may not have a really clear answer for that for a few years, but we do know a lot about, from what we're hearing today, about what a lot of people are saying. The issues and concerns are about, access to service, coverage of service, and particularly improving equity certainly seemed like a very high priority for a lot of folks. And then I think we heard some important key takeaways for us as the team leading this from the consulting side, and for TJPDC and all the partners working on this plan, about being more inclusive in the engagement and outreach in a variety of ways. I think those are some big takeaways that I'm hearing.
Scudder, I'd add to that one theme that I heard a few times today was environmental, sustainability issues.
We talked more nuance with environmental as well in our group, so we've got a lot of notes on that we can add. Great. I guess Tim was going to do next steps in the process.
Yeah, so as you can see, and as Will mentioned earlier, that we are sort of at this first red dot in the listen portion of our project timeline here. We have launched our website in the survey, which we've noted multiple times throughout this presentation. We are aiming for that public meeting to be sort of late fall, early winter. It'll most likely be a virtual format, much like today was. We're still figuring out the logistics of that and the exact time for that, but be on the lookout, kind of coming up in that time frame. During that public meeting, we will have a draft vision statement that we'll be working on from this point to that point. Taking in what we've heard today and some of the other results and findings from our other analyses, and then we will also be doing a sort of a deep dive into the actual transit system and looking into the data, coming up with preliminary recommendations for some different service plans and service recommendations. And I think with that, we wanted to use the rest of the time for any more discussion, as Diantha does need to close the meeting with the notice language, but does anyone have any sort of closing thoughts that we did not?
It looks like Willie has his hand up.
Yeah, I'll make one final comment. I'm very impressed with this group of folks in your knowledge base. But I just want everybody to be sure to, I know this is simple, but I want you to realize that there's no transit system in Louisa County. We have Jaunt, but Jaunt is like a taxi service. You call up, make an appointment to pick you up from point A to point B. So there's really no transit system in Louisa County. you're relating, most of you are relating to what's exists in Charlottesville and Albemarle County, which is a well-established actually transit system that does not exist in the rural areas. So it's going to be interesting how you put all this together if you're going to continue to keep us in your regional concept. So I'm sitting back and hope to have some input as we go along with this, but also I really want you to think in terms of what it really means to have transit system in a rural area. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
So yeah, I see Stephen has his hand up.
I wanted to offer a quick reaction to the activity that Scudder took us through earlier with the coverage versus frequency trade-off. I would like to challenge the notion that it's only the transit system that we can affect, that, you know, the way you couched that exercise was we're sitting on the transit commission and we have these 10 buses, what do we do with them? And I'd like to offer a different solution, that if we knew that the vulnerable populations in our community who relied on transit, if we knew that those people were among all those dots along the high density corridors, and we knew that all the dots on the periphery were people who love driving and have no interest in taking transit, then that is another solution to the problem. You've eliminated the conflict there. So I just want to put that out there to challenge our assumption that it's only the transit system that we're designing here. I think we need to remember that we need to take land use into account when we're setting the stage for these successful transit outcomes.
Yeah,
Stephen.
To
Willie's point, I know I saw a Greene County transit bus somewhere going through town, and maybe even a Buckingham one, which I don't know how they operate, and maybe Fluvanna and Louisa doesn't, but I don't know if those systems get factored into this, but I did want to just bring that up to Willie's question because he's in my group and he's emphasized that a lot. I don't know how those buses operate, no idea, but I think I've seen them.
Yeah. Scudder, did you want to respond to the first point? I think Stephen might be able to answer Mr. Brooks's question there.
Yeah. Yeah, over the long term, we can certainly make an enormous difference in aligning where people live with where transit service is the most useful. In the short term, we generally have to deal with where people are. And that's one of the reasons I definitely want to emphasize that as a vision plan, we can use this as part of an iterative transit visioning and land use planning process to make your transit system the most effective it can be, in addition to your land use plans aligning with that. Absolutely.
Stephen, this is Diantha. Do you want to answer Ed's question about Buckingham and Greene? Because he is right. He has seen those buses. I mean, they are there.
Yeah, John offers different services in all of these localities. We offer service in Louisa and Buckingham. And as of July 1st of 2020, last year, we assumed management of Greene County Transit as well. So we negotiate with each of the localities what their top priorities for transit are, and every locality has very different vision for what their priorities are. So yes, those services exist, and they're all negotiated independently with those localities.
Now, we'll add, Ed, just as Albemarle County works with Jaunt for our commuter services we have.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, to Crozet. Yeah, okay, thank you. I had no idea they were connected.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a great question. Good to know. Yes.
We probably have time for one more question before we hand it back to the chair.
Well, I would love to just make a statement. It's not so much a question because I know we are down on time, and I want to thank everybody for the enormous commitment that they've given today. But I also want to make sure that everybody recognizes this is the beginning of our engagement process. This is not a one and done, and that we are committed to continuing to hear from the voices that are not in this group right now. We recognize that this does not mirror our community. So we are committed to doing that. We would love to rely on you all to help us do that, sharing the website, sharing the survey, sharing the opportunities for the public to engage in this process. And then, we need to cast that net as widely as possible, because all of these surveys are only going to show what this group here prioritizes for the vision. And so we're going to rely on you all to help us with that. And then finally, the last thing I want to note is that we all know that this plan is only as successful as its buy-in and as the commitment is made to investment in the change. And so I want us to all keep in mind that that is the goal, is not just to have a beautiful vision, but to have something that can be implemented and can be bought into by our entire region. And so with that, I'd love to turn it over to Diantha to close us out, and know that we would love to continue to hear from you on this and reach out to our team at the PDC directly so that we can share feedback that we're getting with the consultant team. Diantha?
Thanks, Christine. I think you summed it up very well. And I just thanks for everybody who has spent this time this morning with us. Great discussion and wonderful questions. And I know everyone has things they do need to do, and I have to officially adjourn the Regional Transit Partnership meeting this morning and let everybody know that we will be next meeting in December because of the holidays. So the next RTP meeting is scheduled for December the 2nd at 4 o'clock. And thank you again for this wonderful discussion. And I just really appreciate everybody attending. Thank you very much. And I think we're gone. Enjoy.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.